in it, so that was wonderful. Thank you. Great, and then I'm happy to introduce Rebecca. Rebecca Schuman is a St. Louis-based writer and translator who contributes regularly to The Owl, The Hairpin, Slate, The Atlantic, and other publications. She holds an MFA in fiction writing from the New School and a PhD in German from the University of California-Irvine. Schadenfreude, a love story, is her first work of commercial nonfiction. Welcome, Rebecca. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited that so many of you are here and only a few are people that I'm related to. But I appreciate you being here as much as the people I'm not related to. Susan, that was just fantastic. You are my better in every way. I can't read your memoir. You have a Stasi file about you. I do not. I did not do anything that was, first of all, I wasn't there yet, and I also didn't do anything that was notable enough to get me noticed by the Stasi, although I would have been really proud to have that. Okay, so as Susan mentioned, every chapter in this book is titled with a German word that doesn't have an exact English translation. Some of them are long, like you expect. Some of them are not as long, but still a little hard to translate directly. Some of them are words that you know, like Schadenfreude, Lebensraum, which has a Nazi connotation. It just means habitat, but well, now it doesn't anymore. Once upon a time, it just meant habitat. So the chapter I'm going to read from is called Sprachgefühl. So that comes from two words meaning speech and feeling. And so it means to like have a knack for languages, but also to have a feeling for whether what you're saying is right or not. So it's not just that you studied the grammar and you got an A on your grammar quizzes, and when you are talking about, okay, am I on top of the table or am I jumping on the table? Is there motion or station? You know, you can go through the things, or you can just be like, that doesn't sound right, and so I'm going to do what does sound right. So that's having a Sprachgefühl, right? So this chapter takes place in 1995. I had had 1 year of German. I had no Sprachgefühl, but I was very arrogant because I did very well in my German 101 class, like the best student. Because having taught many German 101 classes now, I know that German 101 is easy as shit. You don't have to, like, as long as you go and do the homework, it's really easy. The problem is that it seems so easy that you feel like you shouldn't have to go and you shouldn't have to do the homework, and that's where people end up flunking out of German 101. But, so I was like the #1 freshman in German 101. I got a special little book, German-English dictionary for my studies. I declared a German major very hastily because I was so good at it, apparently, but also because I really loved Franz Kafka so much, just so much. And it didn't matter to me that he wasn't actually German. He lived in what's now the Czech Republic, was Austria when he was born. It became Czechoslovakia when he was about 37. But he wrote in German because Prague, where he lived, was a bilingual city for his whole life, but it was stratified by class. The working class spoke Czech, and the upper classes spoke German, and he belonged to sort of the Jewish upper middle class, and all successful Jewish people in Prague spoke German because they wanted to fit in with the upper classes. This went great for him until the official language of the country changed to Czech. And those of you who are bilingual, grew up bilingual, know that you don't just learn to read and write in 2 languages. You have to try. Someone has to teach you to actually read. So my husband, for example, is bilingual in Polish, but he never learned to read and write, so he's fluent but illiterate. And Kafka was fluent in Czech, but didn't speak it that well. So he actually he was a very high-ranking attorney, and he had to have his brother-in-law look over his stuff to make sure that it didn't have a lot of grammatical errors in it. And you know, he's one of the best writers who ever lived, and even he had some trouble, just not in his person. But so he wrote in German, and so I decided I was going to major in German, and my professor said, well, that's great, you know, you're going to have to learn German better. And I was like, yeah, I mean, you know, I'm going to be, right? I'll just go to Germany. I'll get immersion. Immersion is what you need. I kept hearing about what you need is immersion. You need immersion. And to me, immersion meant magic. You just go, and you just hang out for a while with whoever, doing whatever, and then you're going to be fluent, right? It's sort of like, you know, step 1, immersion, step 2, question mark, step 3, German major. So I show up in Germany with a lot of opinions and not much studying aptitude, and it's 1995. I mean, I'd definitely been practicing my German, or at any rate, I'd continued to be the best student in my German 101 class. Every test, quiz, and one-page mini essay about such prescient intellectual topics as whether I owned a cassette player, I did, had come back scrolled with A's. There had never been a class time exercise that I had not been able to master. So although I had never so much as read a single sentence of Goethe Mann or even the great unassailable Kafka in the original, nor had I ever had a single conversation with a German other than the beloved and overly enunciative Frau von der Heide, my professor, as far as I was concerned, I was pretty much a native speaker, especially given that anything I didn't already know, I would acquire through magic. This is not what happened. What happened is that I spent the next 2 weeks, so I've just arrived in Germany, speaking very loud English on the bus and making a general Arsch, that's the German word for ass, out of myself on the few occasions I had to speak to an actual German. This wasn't magic at all. It was like hard. The thing is, Frau von der Heide was still right. She had told everybody on the first day of class that German was easy. German's not a categorically difficult language. If you check the 5-point scale of difficult languages for native speakers of English, Spanish and French rank a 1, German is a 2. It has a lot in common with English. It's basically, English is German that got bored and lazy and just dropped all of its endings on. And the 5s are like Mandarin, Arabic, Korean. And yet, German's ease comparative to Farsi and Uzbek, both 4s, notwithstanding, the dulcet vernacular of Nietzsche and Wagner has the undeniable characteristic of sounding mean and nasty to the untrained ear, and of requiring a near total grasp of some voluminous grammar conventions to communicate even simple concepts. This can make it seem hard when everyone around you is talking at Autobahn speed and you have no idea what they're saying, but it sounds like they might be ordering you to murder a kitten immediately. To say something in German as banal as I live in the red house, you have to use the dative case, which gives special endings to the word for the, das Haus becomes dem, and red, rot, becomes roten, unless you take away the, in which case it becomes rotem, which in and of itself is enough to send most reasonable English speakers screaming away, rot, im Gesicht. Correct use of dative BT dubs, because now I'm super good at it. If you use that wrong word ending, the person you're addressing may think that a red house lives in you, or that you are trying to be a red house, or that you are pondering both your existence and that of red houses in general. At the very least, it will be abundantly clear that you are suffering from some sort of acute malady, one that can only be cured by your neighbor switching into heavily accented, questionably ordered English. Are you not meaning that instead you to school will go? Oh yeah, you're way better at it than me. Sorry. So instead of magic, this is what happened during my first week in Germany after 1 year's worth of study, all of which took place in a heavily controlled environment requiring only the regurgitation of a finite set of totally useless vocabulary words recited on cue and only after substantial inner monologue rehearsal, all with the context of less apt classmates fucking it up to make me look like a genius. The first time I attempted to utter a full sentence to an actual German in her native land was on the day our group landed in Düsseldorf and then drove to Cologne. I needed to inform the tiny spectacled receptionist at the Cologne Youth Hostel, sorry, I'm skipping a big long parenthetical, that my fold-up bunk bed was stuck in its up position, some German efficiency, yeah, and thus locked to the wall. I broke out in a cold sweat despite the day's heavy, almost tropical warmth. Air conditioning, or Klimaanlage, is dismissed by most Germans as an indiscriminate typhus factory. I shuffled down the stairs and repeated in my head over and over the most accurate description of my situation I could muster. Mein Bett ist geschlossen. A sentence that literally means my bed is closed for business. But whose obvious use of is, rather than the incomprehensible passive voice, conveys a more permanent, existential, perhaps sensual state, rather than the bed's actual state of being temporarily lodged vertically. And furthermore, whose use of my conveys one's permanent, actually owned bed, rather than one's transient accommodations in a youth hostel. A more accurate rendering of the state of affairs would have been Das Bett in Zimmer 405 geht nicht auf. The bed in room 405 won't open. Which at the time I could not have come up with if I'd had 2 months. So my bed is closed for business, would have to do, and I repeated it over and over in my head in Frau von der Heide's effortless, melodic accent. My bed is geschlossen, my bed is geschlossen, my bed is geschlossen. I tiptoed to the front desk where the back of the receptionist's spiky blonde head was currently turned to me as she made a harried intercom announcement in fluent French for the benefit of the chain-smoking, francophone 12-year-olds currently sharing the hospital with us. The word for excuse me in German, by the way, we have a lot of German speakers here. Audience participation, how do you say excuse me? You bump into someone, what do you say? Entschuldigung, that's right, it's a long word. It literally means apology or excuse. And it's long and difficult enough that a native speaker can tell from its first syllable just what kind of rube she's dealing with, especially given that there exists some sort of physiological conspiracy in my throat in which it knows instinctively that I'm attempting to communicate in a foreign tongue, and thus at the exact moment I attempt a word fills with phlegm. So, despite or perhaps because of my intense staircase journey of rehearsal, what first came out to the German receptionist was followed by a coughing fit. It did get her attention, and so was a successful utterance according to today's more progressive language pedagogy. Bitches. No, such a nerd joke. Nerd joke, pedagogy. Throat half cleared, I then managed to eke out, Mein Bett ist geschlossen, heavily Americanized and utterly without context, which resulted in the first of what would in my life be hundreds, if not thousands, of quizzical German, what in the fuck just happened here looks. And through small glasses, they're very piercing. It's a very piercing one. Unlike the Germans I'd meet who would immediately and sanctimoniously switch to English without prompting, however, this receptionist was patient, knowing as she did that my group was at least trying, unlike those degenerate French enfants. So, she nodded with increasing amounts of comprehension as I sputtered out the word Wand, that means wall, and then made what I hoped was the universal hand gesture for her, Wand, die Wand, das Bett! Verticality. And then she managed to extract my room number and inform me that her colleague would be right on it. And bless her spiky little soul, she did this all based on my effectively proclaiming to her, unprompted, that the bed I owned back at home was shut like a door. So, while it was possible to be understood in German, even if I didn't speak it well, not everyone was patient enough to allow that to happen. This is understandable, given that rather than a week's worth of magic, it takes years of protracted study and immersion to develop what Germans, Germanically, call Sprachgefühl, or a feeling for what belongs to a certain linguistic situation, such as when a bed is actually yours, rather than simply located in a room in which you're staying. What's more, 2 seconds spent thinking about whether that bed is in motion toward the wall or stationary against it, and whether to use the dative case, and your conversation partner has already gotten bored and started yelling at you for buttering your bread incorrectly. Once the receptionist's colleague had been dispatched to unlock my bed, I resisted the urge to collapse into it and instead embarked on the streets on a series of wholly banal activities that, given that they were banal things happening in Germany, took on monumental significance. I boarded my first S-Bahn, short for Schnellbahn or fast train, the commuter rail that links the bucolic towns that surround almost every German city with the center. The youth hostel Cologne was located, as most youth hostels are, far from anywhere anyone who's 12 or 18 could get up to any sort of good trouble. I learned the hard way that the doors of a German train do not open automatically at every stop. Rather, you have to push the giant flashing button, the one that says, coincidentally, push here to get out. Even in thwarting me, the Germans were unassailably efficient. I walked down my first certifiably old street, I saw my first Gothic cathedral close up, the staggering Kölner Dom, the Cologne Cathedral, which took over 600 years to build, measures 134,000 square feet, and was pretty much the only part of Cologne left standing after the Allied bombing. I saw my first German street signs. The font, bold and sans serif, was so precise. My first German traffic light, so stern. No wonder Germans don't jaywalk. My first German trees, so erect. My first German people from a safe distance. Please don't talk to me, please don't talk to me, please don't talk to me. And most important of all, I sat my corduroy clad behind on a splintering wooden seat in my very first German Biergarten and ordered and consumed my very first legal beer. Aside, the very first illegal beer I consumed at the age of 17 was consumed at the house of somebody who is currently sitting in this room with his parents. Who did not know that that happened with the beer. And we all turned out okay. We all turned out okay. Frau von der Heide had explained to us that in every region in Germany, there's a local specialty, and Cologne's is the Kirsch, which Herr Neudorf took great pains to tell us was klein aber stark, small but strong, like my sister-in-law, who's here today. I didn't see why we needed a warning. Just because I hadn't slept in 30 hours and was too chicken shit to order any food, and those teeny tiny strong beers cost 2 Deutsche Marks each, which I couldn't help notice was actually less than it cost to buy a thimble-sized glass of room temperature mineral water. Halfway through my second Kirsch, I chanced to look up at the sky and almost fell backward off the bench. Vorsicht, Rebecca, said Herr Neudorf, klein aber stark. Stars here, I said. They're brighter than they are at home. I swear they are. Aber auf Deutsch, Rebecca. Die Sterne hier, ja, sind sehr, sehr stärker. Gut, aber das Bier, Rebecca, das Bier. The beer's strong as well. My inaugural entry into my artisanal travel journal, this was the journal that I had made myself. I thought that my trip to Europe was so important that it, like just a random book that I bought wouldn't be good enough. So I actually cut up a pillowcase and some cardboard, and I sewed some leftover printer paper together from my dorm room, and then I glue sticked it all together, and I was like, I made a book, it's really important. This is what people did before the internet, right? Anyway, my inaugural entry into my artisanal travel journal that night in overly careful penmanship that matched the affected prose. Köln. This room is small and odd, but adequate. Tonight, oh no, wait, sorry. Ordered beer in German, did passable job. May take a few more weeks before I am fluent. Tonight I saw the dome. Latticework spires against the darkening sky, lit up green, bats flying around. Understand, finally, why some people believe in God. All right, I'm going to stop there and we can do Q&A. I found two questions. I don't know if people normally do questions here, but I like to interact. So, not that you don't like to interact.
Questions?
You can ask Susan questions too. Or you don't have to ask questions. Yes.
So when did you become fluent?
Oh, yeah, good question. Chapter, I want to say 6. Yeah, chapter 6. 1997. In 1997, I returned to Germany, and this time I went to Berlin, because I spent most of the summer of 1995 bemoaning the fact that the picturesque little town we lived in was not cool enough for me. I was not cool, but I thought it was really cool. I was really into Pulp Fiction at the time, and smoking cigarettes, which no one should ever do because it's terrible for you. So everywhere I went with me, I carried a patch of drum tobacco, because that's what John Travolta did in Pulp Fiction, and I would roll my vile drum cigarettes and smoke them and listen to my Walkman and be like, this town sucks! Host at 11, boo, my host family's mean! There's 2 chapters about my mean host family, because I'm such an ass to them. So for 2 days at the end of the trip, we got back on the bus after our host family time, and we went to Berlin for like 3 days. And I was just like, it was 1997. The artist Christo had just wrapped the Reichstag building in silver foil, and everybody everywhere was doing something bizarre beyond words and super cool. There were like bombed out buildings that people were just like operating bars out of. The wall had just come down, the whole place was torn up, and I was just like, these are my people. And they were like, yeah, not your people. So I went back to Berlin for my junior year abroad and plunked myself into an apartment share, a Wohngemeinschaft, which literally means living community, with 5 Germans. And I was like, now I'm gonna get fluent. And I did, but it was hard. And one of my roommates, my loft mates, was what I like to call the Sprachpolizei, the language police. Germans, they're pedantic people. Yeah, and I'm very sensitive to pedantry, and so it's a very strange affair that we have. Like, I love these people, but they're always yelling at me for doing things wrong. And so I had this one flatmate, bless her heart, Naomi, who was like, Rebecca, your German is worse today than usual even, and it's not very good ever. Like, she was always picking on me and correcting my verbs and all this stuff, and so I was like super scared. But somehow, by hanging with them and their friends all the time, I did manage to get a very sort of rough around the edges, dialect-filled, illiterate, because I didn't do any of my coursework, obscene fluency. But I would say that I didn't actually become like really good reading, writing fluent until graduate school, until I finally, so that's chapter 8. So by that time I was almost 30, and I had finally developed some sense of emotional and intellectual maturity, and realized that all these German works that weren't Kafka, that I had pretended to read and not done a very good job at, were amazing. And I was like, why didn't anybody tell me? Heinrich von Kleist is great! And so I did a doctorate in German because I thought I would really enjoy it, and I did really enjoy it. And then I decided I wanted to be a German professor forever, but the field of German studies did not agree. And so that is how I ended up with all of this. Good question, thank you.
So did you ever try to be a German professor?
For 4 years. And I just, those of you who are academics know that the academic job market is super brutal. So I finished my doctorate, went on the academic job market, which was like a job in and of itself, did not do a good job at that job. And I got some jobs adjuncting to kind of pave the way. And then I did get a job, a fairly high-ranking postdoctoral teaching professorship at Ohio State for 2 years. So I was like a legit German professor at a very good school for 2 years. And then I went on the job market again during those 2 years and got progressively a little bit closer to getting a tenure track job, so like a permanent job, so that I wouldn't have to keep moving. And at that point, my then partner, who's now my husband, and I were living apart from each other, and so we couldn't really, get married if we wanted to do that and start a family or anything. I was basically just expected to move from visiting, temporary professorship to temporary professorship around the country in perpetuity for as long as it took. And I was 35, and I wanted to have kids. And those of you who came early saw that I brought my daughter here with me, so the ending ended well, other than the fact that my daughter is like, probably having a tantrum right now. I asked my father to take her out of hearing range for all of you. But yeah, so I was on the job market for 4 years, and I tried really hard, and it just sort of didn't work out. And instead of slinking away shamefully and like genuflecting to the profession that had been kind enough not to let me in, I went out with a little bit of a bang. And that's how I got hired at Slate, and then this book deal came on the basis of my work at Slate, and so it all turned out okay. But there was a time when I was like, there were just about 2 days in 2013 when I was the most famous failed academic in America. Like not 2 days, like 14 minutes. Like 14 minutes. It still wasn't great.
You're too funny to be a German professor.
One of the tenure track interviews I had, actually, I heard the postmortem from a grad student in that program, and they said that my CV was just impeccable, and they really loved all my research, but that I had too much of a personality. And I had toned it down. I was like trying to play the game. I had a really severe boring professor haircut, and I was wearing the standard black MFA, MLA ill-fitting suit, and I was really trying to tone it down, but I guess I can't. Like, you bottle this up and you can still see it.
After you were fluent in Germany, when you would go downtown to a store and talk to a clerk in your German, did they say, why don't you just speak English?
No.
Did they ever do that?
It got to a point, I considered myself completely fluent when people did not consider their English better than my German anymore. So from like the second half of my junior year abroad on, my German was generally better than people's English was.
Not accented?
My accent's pretty good, if you've heard it, in the tiny
Not American accent.
Yeah, no, I mean, my German accent is, it's unplaceable to German speakers, but they often think I'm Austrian, because I lived for a year in Austria, so I did affect a little bit of an accent when I was there, but also Austrians are very lax about grammar. It's one of the many, many, many things that make them superior to their neighbors. I love Austrian, I love Germans too, but the Austria chapter got cut from the book because all I did for I was a Fulbright scholar, because at one point I was ambitious and smart, and so I was working on my dissertation with my Fulbright in Vienna. Vienna's it's an amazing city, but in the winter it is so depressing. And I was apart from my partner at the time, and it got dark at like 2 in the afternoon. And so for the whole year I was in Vienna, I was basically just depressed, in the birthplace of psychoanalysis. So I thought that was, and I entitled the chapter Todestrieb, which is a Freud word that means death drive. And healthy people have like an eros and they have like the lust drive and the death drive that balance each other out. And if you're too swung in one way or the other, it gives you either like hysteria or depression. And so, yeah, but my other editor was like, this, cut the whole thing. But so Austrians don't really care about the dative case, for example, and they never, the genitive just, they're like, genitive is for highfalutin jerks. And so anytime I met Germans in the later parts of my academic career, they were just like, oh, you're American? I assumed you were Austrian. Because I thought all of your weird linguistic quirks and your weird accent was just an unplaceable part of Austria that I'd never heard of. Like, maybe you spoke in dialect most of the time, your Hochdeutsch wasn't as good. So I was never mistaken for a native where I was, but I was often mistaken for a native from another part of native-speaking German lands. Probably, it's been a while since I've been there, so at this point I definitely would be called out, mostly because my vocabulary. You lose it, you get it back, it depends on if you're there. So I'd have to go back for, a couple of weeks. A couple of months. Yes.
So, what was your dissertation about?
You really want to know?
Yeah.
I'll do the one sentence version. It was about Kafka, but through the language philosophy of both the early and late Ludwig Wittgenstein. So, a real page turner. Piece of very current academic work that everybody thought was a great idea. That's why I got a job so easily. Yes.
In your opinion, what is the best way to teach a language?
The multiple cultural literacies approach pioneered right here at UT. I think I'm needed with my, are you okay? The multiple cultural literacies approach, which is being pioneered right here at UT Austin, is the best German language program for German language pedagogy in the country. It makes the best German pedagogues all around. The pedagogue who was at my department at UC Irvine, Glenn Levine, is a UT graduate, and the multiple cultural literacies approach treats beginning language learners as if they are uneven bilinguals instead of native speakers of one language and bad speakers of that. And so you're never trying to become a poor imitation of a native speaker. You're just going to be a bilingual your unevenness will fluctuate throughout your life. But so it's an emphasis on intercultural communication, so you do cultural content and interesting literature from day one, and less of an emphasis on grammar. So it is not only my favorite, but the best.
I'm very excited. Thank you, John, for asking that question.
We just settled
Yeah.
swinging along. Yeah.
Were you like, audiolingual, motherfucker? 1993 in the house!
Sorry, Laura, my dear friend Laura and I have
had a long debate about this.
Well, I'm just a rando. I didn't get a job as a German professor. Don't ask me. I'm not going to argue. And you know, I've gotten into beefs with other German PhDs with this because they were like, well, the multiple cultural literacies might make them better equipped to hang out with people in Leipzig, but it doesn't make them equipped to get an A in my class. And I was like, well, maybe the problem is your class.
Yeah. I'm telling you, man.
Yes.
Hi, I'm excited to see you because I followed you on Twitter.
Oh boy, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, checking on my kid. I think she's okay.
I remember when she was born.
Oh yeah, I gave her to a 96-year-old Jewish man. She looked just like my grandpa when she was born. Just spitting image. She still won't sleep.
Oh man. So one of the things I liked about your writing, besides being hilarious, was talking about academia. And is that something that a research interest that you think you'll write about? Or are you still?
That would be super awesome if I could write a meta-academic paper about how much academia sucks. I mean, right now is a different time, right? Because academia is under, like, it's okay if academia is under principled critique by people who know how it works, but right now it's under full-blown nuclear annihilation by a bunch of willfully ignorant jerkos. So, you know, I'm not really in the business of trying to burn the whole thing down right now. I'm mostly just trying to survive. I've also, since I had a kid, been out of the classroom. I adjuncted again for a year after I quit academia. I didn't really quit. I was still adjuncting for a year. And I'd like to, now that adjuncting is actually adjunct to my other career as a writer and translator, I'd like to get back in the classroom, but it's, right now, adjuncting pays so little that if I put my daughter in daycare, it would be a net negative.
Okay, so you're a translator, or do you?
German to English.
And I was going to, German to English,
Yeah.
okay. Because I was thinking, I wonder how this book, if someone translated it into German, has that happened, or will it?
We're still trying to sell the German rights. It's like a minor hit sometimes in Germany on Amazon.de in English, because Germans do read English really well.
Yeah.
So it's doing okay in Germany now, but I would like to sell the German rights. They get to choose the translator. I have a translator I'd like to use, who is, of course, a UT PhD. So he's the best.
I think, yeah, I'm wondering how, I have one German friend who is really funny. And she would really love it, I think.
Well, I hope to have a German version sometime in the next year or two.
Good.
All right. There's another question, okay?
Yeah, when you described yourself, not entirely just saying as a failed academic,
Yeah.
I was thinking of the guy who ran 9.
Eric. Yeah.
Do you interact?
We're friends. Yeah.
Would you do a tour?
Oh, I don't know if he'd have me. He's like, you know, I think he lives over there full time now. He writes for Die Zeit, which is like a German public. He writes in German. He's like the Jumper-Lahiri of quote-unquote failed intellectuals. His story is really interesting because he took himself out of contention for tenure. Like he just sort of decided at Penn. Well, Penn is a hornet's nest. That's another whole thing. Like I know why. I know. Because people started telling me things. The best part about being like an academic apostate was that people started telling me things. So I know some things. But anyway, yeah, Eric is amazing and he's super awesome. Maybe someday we can do, some sort of failed intellectuals super group. We'll have to find a couple more people who join the ranks. Our field is completely cratering. So as more people peel off and start doing weird stuff involving German stuff, maybe we'll be able to get, like for a super group, you need like 6 people or 5, like the traveling Wilburys of failed Germanists. But yeah,
Which field is cratering? What do you in
German studies.
Okay, why? I wonder why.
Oh, because the foreign languages in general just aren't doing very well because they are not seen as immediately profitable for the university because there has to be, it's not even because nobody needs foreign languages because everybody speaks English. That's not even true. It's actually about the student to professor ratio. In order to have a class be any good, it has to be small. And so it just actually doesn't make very much money per student. So that's the bottom line. I know all sorts of bottom line stuff because for some reason, my husband, who's a non-tenure track philosophy professor, is like pretty tight with his dean. And so he like knows all sorts of weird dean stuff. And about how because their department is always on the chopping block, but he learned that it's gonna be fine because they're per student, because they can have pretty big classes. But like a huge German class is 14 people. And any more than that, you can't teach it. Like 20, you might as well not do it. Because everybody has to be able to talk like 8 or 9 times per class, or you can't do it. Yes?
Is there anywhere we can find that lost Austrian chapter?
The first couple are like the middle 600 words of it are on an awesome blog run by this guy named Jason Howell out of San Francisco called the Howlarium, HOWLARIUM. And so that he calls it Undead Darlings, and he publishes people's disjecta, etc. But yeah, I'm trying to find a home for it eventually. I can't decide whether to incorporate it in some other book or try to do it as a one-off for some sort of long reads thing. Like, it's sitting there waiting to have something done with it.
So I'd like to hear about your MFA experience.
Yeah. It was, I'm going to be short about it because it wasn't like, again, here at UT, there's a Missioner Center, which is like one of the finest MFA programs in the world. Mine wasn't like that. It was more of a hobby thing, basically. It was at the New School in New York, so it had the benefit of very famous faculty, but it wasn't at the time. I think it's very much more selective now, but I was there in one of its early years. So it wasn't super selective, although they did let in some really smart people, like my friend Frank, who's around here somewhere. So Frank is a super talented writer, and we're still friends, and that was 17 years ago, so some great friendships were made there too. But yeah, the MFA is an interesting experience because it's not rigorous in the way that a PhD is rigorous, because you just don't have to read very much. But it's rigorous in a different way because you can be really eviscerated in a workshop environment. But, you know, I was really obnoxious back then, so it's really hard to gauge how that experience really benefited me, because I wanted to be a fiction writer. I was not very good at it. And, you know, I was just really into being really edgy. There was this one story I turned in where I basically just decided to make up as many obscene epithets as yeah, Frank, you remember. But then Frank did it better. We sort of had an obscene epithet off, and I was completely obscenified under the table. But I'll talk to you more about it afterwards. It was so long time ago.
Do you want to translate this book into German?
Myself? No, because I'm not a native speaker of German, so I can't really do.
But it would have all your quirks. Like,
but my friend Kirsten, like, knows me really, really well, and knows my writing really well, and he can do the humor. Like, there's German expressions that aren't a literal translation of the jokes I make, but they would work, and I would never be able to do that. I do textbook German. My German is very newscaster, sort of book German, and you can't really, you have to live somewhere for like half a century to really be able to do humor like a native, so I want a native German to do it. I don't want to be a poor imitation of a native speaker. Okay, let's do one more.
You said earlier that the German character may lean towards peasantry.
Yeah.
Is there also a certain glee with certain kinds of mismatches? It's very anecdotal, but I work with a small group of Germans, and so my empirical knowledge is very limited. But while they were very pedantic towards me, because we were working together, and when I was wrong, they would tell me how wrong I was.
Yeah.
But
they think they're doing you a big, huge favor. They kind of are.
It took a few weeks for me to adjust to that.
Yeah.
But when certain mismatches, because we were actually in Philadelphia, and like the buffalo chicken and cheesesteak was an endless source of glee for them, because it had no buffalo in it. It had no steak in it. And so I was very happy, but it was wrong.
It's almost like they were Schadenfreude.
Yeah.
I don't have anything to add to that. That's awesome.
Okay.
All right, well, so I'm going to allow my child to come back in here because now she's sort of reached and breached her limit of video watching and candy eating, which is how I parent because I'm awesome. But I'm here. If you want to buy a book, I would love that. I'm here to sign it. My 2-year-old is still breastfeeding because I am from Oregon, so that she might want to, and if that grosses you, this is Austin, so probably won't gross you out. But if it does, just avert your virgin eyes. And you can watch this.